Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're listening to this. Um, and yes, you probably clicked this because of the title. I spent the last few days, obviously not in one sitting, watching a 5 hour interview with the currently canceled Andrew Tate. And whether you're listening to this because you agree with some of the things he says or not, probably not. A lot of people, at least how it's been shown on social media, don't agree with him. But I wanted to create this video because listening to a 5 hour podcast and it reveals a lot about a person. So usually I love listening to long form content anytime there's someone who's kind of breaking in on social media, becoming big, and they are talking about very, very controversial issues. They have strong opinions on certain things. There is going to be a backlash that people will be on either side of each argument. And as a host of a podcast that wants to think about things and look deeper into subjects, or like as we use in the currently, a lot of people have been using this at work, is like double click into things, like click into it, double click into it, and really see what the truth is behind a lot of what's going on. And Andrew Tate has been around for many years, actually. If you don't know who he is and you just probably seen his name, which caused you to click this and listen to this. And he's been making videos. I mean, he got big. He was a kickboxing champion, became, I think, 3 times or 5 times, something like that. And then became a business owner of several businesses, actually, he talks about on the podcast, in this podcast, which I'll link below if you're curious to hear 5 hours. But I'm pretty much going to go over a lot of the main points. I always recommend listening, though, because whether you agree or not, there's a reason why he became so big over the last few months, right? So my whole thing is like, why does a person get to that level, get to that status on social media? And then you have social media companies who don't agree with this, or at least, there's hate speech. There's all these things that they use to take down someone, which in some instances, it's granted. They need to do that, right? And in some instances, it's really like, does that matter? Or they should look into it and actually talk to the person. So I've been fascinated by this individual. Obviously, I'm in this. I look into masculinity. I'm very close to it. If you've been a longtime listener of the podcast before it evolved into what it is now, we had several men and women on the podcast talk about masculinity and the challenges, the beautiful sides of it. And if you're curious to hear those, Monica Yates' podcast is phenomenal. Philip Folsom's podcast is phenomenal. We've had Avi Greenberg on our podcast twice. Both great. Just his story in the first one and then becoming a father in the second one. It's definitely something I'm still very much close to. I still have a men's group that I go to weekly. And it's still something that is top of mind a lot of the time, and especially when I talk to a younger man who's confused and lost and not sure. So I just want to jump into it. That was a long intro. If you fast forward it, that's totally okay. So I have my notes in my phone that I took while I was listening, whether I was walking the dog or sitting here at home just listening and taking notes, which was most of this, was mostly during walks. But I like to start with they talk about all the things that happen, him getting canceled and like what it looks like, but the guys who are interviewing him, which is Patrick Bet David, I believe he owns like an insurance company, became big, has a YouTube channel just talking about business and stuff like that. He brings interesting people on his podcast, very controversial figures, which I respect because not everyone gets a platform because usually the owners of certain social media platforms are only one way. So it's like, how are you supposed to, as an individual, make your own conclusion to something if you don't look at both sides, all sides of a said argument? I always say that. So this starts, and the first thought that came to me as he was talking through his story. He does talk about his own upbringing and things like that. Is that the reason why he became so big? Because they asked him this question, like, why does he think that he just exploded over the last few months? And he says he thinks it's because he was giving men, the majority of the people that was watching his content were men, giving men what they've been looking for. And a big part of that, if you want to put it in a holistic way, I'm not talking about the horrible things that you've probably seen or heard about him, but just talking about personal responsibility, which is a lot of us have very difficult times with. I had a difficult time with that for 28 years of my life, and some aspects of my life I still have a difficulty with it. So I think he thinks, at least, and I agree with that statement, that he was giving men, like, he's someone who has strong opinions. He doesn't let anyone disrespect him. I like the fact that he talked about it, and it brought me, he talked about this story before I talk about my opinion. He talks about this story where he stole some girl from a guy, but he made a good point about that. He says that majority of the time, if you're in the dating market, you're always stealing somebody from somebody. And remember learning that many moons ago, before Karina and I were together, is that every girl, and this from a man's perspective, every girl that you are dating, she's definitely dating somebody already. And if you continue and become a couple, you in a sense stole her away from the guy she was seeing. You were just better in many ways, whether that was better looking, you had better status, resources, she could see a future with you. There's so many reasons that could come to there, but it just was like, oh, he stole this girl. He just says that, and he's definitely playing a character and a facade. I listened to another podcast with him on a comedian's podcast, and I'm forgetting the comedian right now. He has a wife, Christina P, and Tom Segura. There we go. Your Mom's House podcast. That he puts on this facade, this character. He likes to joke around and say outlandish stuff. And people see that in short form clips, but never around the context of it, which is why I listen to long form content. You probably clicked this because you saw a quick, post that I made, and it led you here. It works, but at the end of the day, you should always listen to the full thing. But giving men what they're looking for, just seeing a man confident. A lot of men are lacking that nowadays. Seeing a man who walks the talk, and as I was saying before, and I'm always going on tangents, but he stole this girl. Guy comes to his house and says, "I'm not mad at you. You just have to say sorry to me." And he's like, "I'm not gonna say sorry. Like, it was just this is how it happened, right? I'm not gonna say sorry about it." And he apparently doesn't fight these guys off because a friend comes to help him, says some bullshit. He punches his friend in the face, which I'm like, okay, very aggressive. But kickboxing, you can tell by his upbringing why he lives this kind of lifestyle. And in a sense, I believe in that whole Mike Tyson quote, some people just need to be punched in the face. We forgot what that feels like. I'm paraphrasing, but Mike Tyson has said that. Back in the day, I do jujitsu. I feel like that would be great. We get into a fight. I don't want to hurt you. I don't want to be hurt myself. Why don't we do a jiu-jitsu match and see who's the better player, right? We've always had some sense of doing that, and we don't do that anymore. It's all on social media, behind the screen, and if you had to see a person in real life, you'd be afraid. I'm not a fighter. I've never been in an actual street fight in my life, but the whole idea of if someone's going to talk behind a screen, they have to be willing to back it up in person as well. I agree with that statement based on the stories he has shared. If I'm not mistaken, he even had a story where someone was talking crap to him on social media, I think on Twitter, and he messaged the guy and was just like, well, if you want to, I think the guy said something like, oh, if you're this person, like, you should try to come out. And he was like, yeah, I'll come out. So he actually went to the person's house because they gave him the address and was like, meet him there and whatever. And the guy was scared that he actually did that. He didn't think that he was going to do that. So things like that. But anyway, I digress on that. But the whole idea of why he became big is because he's sharing something that men are looking for. And it's, to me, it's that confidence piece that he shares, the personal responsibility piece that he shares, and just this, the brutal truth of many things, not all things, but many things, on what it takes to be a high value man, as is the best way to put it. You know, he talks about cars and planes. I don't think you need any of that to be a high value man, but he believes that's to be so. Whatever. And I like what he said about like a hypocritical system that we live in right now, where it pretends to care about your mental health, but it really doesn't, right? Like a lot of these programs and things that are brought out there, they act like they care, but there's always something underlying within the reasons as to why they're doing that. Obviously, every system, every organization has a bottom line that they have to maintain. And I understand that in a capitalist society, you need that in order for things to be moving and to keep the machine going. In order for us to live the semi-peaceful lives that we live now. You know, in America, at least, you don't have war going on in the streets. You don't have people doing things. Yes, we have crime, but it's not as bad as it has been in history. If you read history, we still, even with all the shit going on, live in one of the most peaceful times of all human history. So, and he says that the only way to be, he doesn't believe in mental health, which is another thing. I was like, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt of like, if you have a purpose and you're doing all these things, working out, eating right, like doing all these holistic things, he says that you shouldn't have the problem. Like all these things, as you start taking care of yourself and working towards becoming better things come to you instead of sitting playing a victim. And he's like, you know, you could just be happy and content by becoming a high value man. And most of the podcast, a lot of his thing is talking. It's directed towards men. You know, so yeah, there's that. And then there was a piece that he talked about with his cancellation that he thinks of it as being fine. Apparently he got picked up by Rumble, which is most people see as I've never been on that platform, but it's a right-wing platform. But it's really not a right-wing platform. It's just a platform who believes in freedom of speech. And I think they have some things that they take down, but not like things as, you know, that Andrew Tate pretty much is talking about. And he believes that there's a villain turning to a hero arc happening in his life. And they talk about some examples. I didn't write those examples down of people that have had that arc of like being portrayed as a villain online and then becoming a hero later on to many, many people. And I'm putting that in a metaphoric sense. But it made me think about like villains like Loki, who had an arc like that. You know, he was the villain of the first movie in the Avengers, and then he kind of has his own redemption arc and becomes a hero in some sense in the Thor movies later on, and helps in many ways. But through his stories, he talks about emotions, which I really agreed with this. I think everyone should if you look at it, if you see it on YouTube, you can be able to click on certain chapters, so you don't have to listen to a whole 5 hours like I did. There's a chapter that he talks about emotions and using that as energy. And as men, we're pretty much geared towards like the main emotions, right? When we're mad, we get really mad. When we're sad, we get really sad. If anything, I think there was a quote he said, again, I'm paraphrasing, how more men become more depressed after like a breakup with a woman than the woman does. And that men, experience these emotions in many events. And I resonated with that for the simple fact that I've been through that. I've been through extreme bouts of anger and used that energy to create. And I've been in extreme bouts of sadness with breakups in the past where I use that energy to create something else in my life. Or, when I broke up with an ex at 19 years old was when I really started to read books and become a better version, because I was like, this whole thing of I was going through relationship to relationships, like just jumping through the hoops. I was like, this is not going to work. I got to become a better person before I get into another relationship. I didn't listen to my own advice because I ended up getting into a relationship again. We broke up when I was 21. Between the end of my 19 years of life to 21, I was in a relationship that was really unhealthy for us both. When we broke things off, I continued that personal investment and stood away from a relationship for about till I met Karina, almost 4 years of being single. So yeah. Anyway, so then he talks about the cancellation was like him being canceled was a conversation or a theme that kept coming up throughout the podcast. And he was about to make a post apparently to show like, hey, I'm not here to just like have men. I think he got canceled because there was like a domestic violence video that came out with him, and apparently the girl that was in that video came out with a video saying that was not what most people are seeing. Like it was just something that was, I think it was like a joke, or like the way they just played. And like, if you are a kinky person, this is going to a sexual side of things, sometimes they just like that. Sometimes most women, most of us know about that famous book that came out many years ago about the guy and the girl, and she's a submissive, and he has like a sex dungeon, and he brings her there and whatever. I forget the name of this thing. I never watched the movie or read the books, but I remember it being a big thing. And that a lot of women are just into that. Some women are, and in our current society, you can't really talk about that because people will deem it as domestic violence. If you like to get hit when you're in the midst of a sexual experience. But anyway, so that's originally, like, I think that is what the big thing that like canceled him, as well as him saying some outlandish shit. But he said before he got canceled, he had a whole post ready to go out about charity for men's mental health, so still supporting that we do have this. I mean, men have the highest suicide rates. I think it's worldwide. I've only seen data for America, and it's really bad. And he was also going to donate to an organization that helps with domestic violence, and was canceled before that. And then he said a line. I'm going to read off it. He said, being a dangerous and outspoken man is dangerous. Most institutions want us soft and zombie-like. And I agree with that. If you look at my Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, like all of them, I have a line that says kind and dangerous, because I don't want to be a person that's deemed, I don't mess with Ruben, or I don't talk to him because he's an asshole, or whatever the case may be. It's more of like, oh, he's a really, I don't want to be called a nice guy. I want to be called like, yeah, he's kind, but he has boundaries. And if someone, passes those boundaries, that's when they get into the danger zone, where I will say something, right? I will be like, no, that's not okay. I will be like, protect my girl, protect my family. And if I have to get physical in that sense, which is why I go to jiu-jitsu, that's what has to happen. Do I want it to get there? No, that's a last resort. I will use my words to try to calm the situation down. I'm again being kind causes that, right? Like understanding where someone's coming from, de-escalating the situation. And if someone tries to do something, the reason why I wanted to learn jujitsu is because I don't want to hurt somebody. I can hurt them with jujitsu, but the point of jujitsu is to lock somebody up to the point that they can't move. And if they do try to move, you'd be like, if you move that way, you're going to get hurt. And then, in that sense, you can have someone call the cops or whatever the case may be. So I don't, when it comes to the whole, most institutions want us soft and zombie like. I don't necessarily believe that's something that is like in the playbook for organizations and institutions. Like we need to make them weak and stupid, right? I don't believe they're doing that on purpose. I think it's just a byproduct of the institutions and what they created and where we're going. Most people see the softness, vulnerability as softness, and I still don't think that's softness. I see that as a strength. So I did not agree with him in that sense, but I get that most people will believe that because if you look at our food system, if you look at our school system and things like that, there's not a sense of like freedom, especially if you're like low income. Where I grew up on food stamps and stuff. Like the food that I got, for instance, I believe that food, we didn't know back then because Ansel Keys like made great arguments, and I put that in quotations if you're just listening, to say, oh, meat, protein, like human food that we've been eating for thousands and thousands of years. And I'm sorry, vegans, you may disagree with this, but the data is out there, and we definitely like ate both products. That's just the reality of the human condition. Yes, we probably didn't eat it as often as most people may think, but that's why fasting is a thing and why we were meant to eat, like have feast and famines type of thing. And we don't live in that kind of world. Thank God that most of us, majority of people, have food on the table, but the food that we're eating is definitely not what we thought was going to be good, because we were just looking at caloric intake, and we were saying we have enough food to feed everyone. Like I think every person can get 21 or 2200 calories a day. I read this in the book, The Wizard and the Prophet, about where this all came from and how we were able to feed more people because of this guy who was considered the wizard, who created science and the whole corn and soy and like how that can help feed a lot of people. But we didn't have the data to say like how it affects our bodies. So I don't think they're making us zombies through the food we're eating or the water we're drinking. They're just trying our best to make sure that we're not, dying on the street and all these diseases that we dealt with in the past because of the food and like sanitation and all these things was just not good for us. Another thing he talked about was his father. Based on my understanding, he definitely had some father trauma, some trauma from there and their relationship. He said he really respected his father in many ways. I mean, his father did, I think, hit him to like, I forget. Shit. I got a brain fart. Sorry, folks. But his father, he said something that your father should be a superhero. And I really resonated with that, because that's something that I'm getting to make sure that my child sees me as a superhero. I love that. They respect me, and they're happy to be around me, not afraid of me, right? They know that daddy's dangerous, but they know that he has this loving and soft and nurturing side as well. But I love the idea of like your father should be your superhero. I see my father ever since we started talking again and being in each other's lives. I see him very much as that, even though he wasn't in my life for many, many years. So I really love that. I really love the fact that he said that line. And again, I think he has some great thoughts and things that he's said, especially in a long form context, that we miss in those shorter term videos that he talks about, women having cars and being a status man who makes a lot of money and just that whole, I put in quotations again, toxic masculine side. But everything he says is not all bad. It's definitely some truths in there that are like uncomfortable that are like, well, that's kind of true. Then he has this part where he talks about his continuing that whole idea of being a dangerous man. I think they go back into that. That a dangerous man is one who never gets tired. They observe and pay attention to their surroundings and people, and pretty much they make everyone else afraid because they're able to show up that way. The scariest person on earth is someone who doesn't quit and who pays very close attention because they can strategize and know what to do next. And that, the way he talks about it is in forms of everything. In business, in if you're in martial arts, and he uses his examples of him being in martial arts. I just burped. That was disgusting. I apologize. And this person is like, you know, there's someone who's, you know, when I'm rolling around in jiu-jitsu, I use this as an example for myself. My whole thing is endurance. Like in the gym, I probably am one of the very few. There's probably a few other guys I roll around with that have really strong endurance, but most guys get tired. And when they get tired, I'm able to take advantage of that moment because it's just like, oh, I can keep going. They are out of breath. They are struggling, right? They're losing their strength because they're out of breath. So if they try to get me on any holds or choke me or get my arm, I'm able to turn that around because they're already weak from being so tired from rolling around. So, you know, a person that doesn't quit, and I'm paying attention to what they're doing to get a sense of like, oh, maybe this guy that I'm rolling around with has a weak left arm. Maybe he's been injured in the past, which causes it to be weak. So I can take advantage of that. I won't hurt him, obviously, but the whole idea is to take advantage of that side, or at least get him tired by continuing to attack that side, which is something that boxers do. It's something that a lot of fighters do if you're into watching contact sports like that. So that's something that stuck out, continuing that whole idea of being dangerous. And maybe there's a better word to use than being dangerous, but that's what I have for now. His relationship with his brother, this was towards the end when he talks about family and why him and his brother, they had a podcast together. A lot of the things they do are together. I think they live together. Their money is together. Like, they're so close. And I love that idea, the true idea of like family being a priority. That's what I got from that whole piece that he talks about with his brother. His brother is younger than him, but I think his brother was in business before him because he focused into kickboxing, but his brother still respects him because he's the eldest brother. And that's something that, you know, I have siblings that never happened. There's none of that in my family, but I think when I have kids, it's teaching like, hey, like respect the fact that your brother is older, or your sister. And respect the fact that they have more life experience. They have a little bit more on you. So respect that. Even if you're more successful than them, you should still respect the fact that they're older and they were the first ones to come through. And the idea that he has that relationship with his brother, and you know, most people say my family is a priority, but then you look at them or you talk to them about their family and they're not, right? Like, hey, did your family live with you? I can tell you straight up that that's not the case for me. It's something that I want to create, but it's not the case for me. I live with my partner. It's not like I have a house and my whole family is living. If I really have family a priority, that's exactly something I would do. I would have a house with enough rooms to fit at least my inner family, because I have a gigantic family. But if I was able to make, you know, millions of dollars, I can buy a house big enough for my entire family, and then everyone can be together and they can all learn from each other, respect one another, and things like that. That is difficult to get to. It is definitely a North Star to look at if you are close with your family. And it's like, how can you bring that in so they can support you in building your own family? Because this is what we did back in the day. We lived in tribes. our families would be really close together. We all lived together in the same place. But nowadays, with the advent of technology and opportunities, well, before the pandemic, opportunities only being in certain places like San Francisco and New York City, which is where majority of people wanted to be. I mean, if you look at the population rates in the most populated cities, New York is up there, like Austin now is up there, like Los Angeles is up there, like places that have tons of opportunities. People go there, and they'll leave their family. I mean, I live in the Bay Area, and I don't think I've met that many people that are born and raised here. A lot of people are from other states and other places. In the building that I live alone, I don't think anyone I've met is from here. Everyone is from somewhere else. So there's that. And then just continuing with that, he calls it the family mentality, because his family upbringing, he was in a community that had a lot of Muslims, and he talks about the respect that he has for Muslim religion and how they live their lives. And one thing that came out of that, at least that I caught, was he gives a story about this guy he met who lived in the house with his 8 brothers and all their wives. So 9 men, 9 women, all under one roof. What's that? Who's that? And how they all just supported one another. And it makes me think of that's pretty much where the future is headed, I think. I think the whole idea of the American dream that lasted for 30, 40 years. You get a good job, you go to school, you get a good job, you get married, you have 2 kids, white picket fence, you have a house, blah, blah, blah. I think starting in the future is going to be more of like you buy a plot of land, you build a house, like 3 or 4 houses, and each of those inner families, right? You have you, your partner, your kids live in one house, but they're next to Uncle Joe and Aunt Daisy and all these folks near you in that community. So you create your own community, and you all support each other, right? Everyone makes a specific amount of money, which leads to paying that land that you own now, or probably you got a loan to own the land, so you guys have to pay the loan, you have to pay for the housing, you support one each other with food, you support one another with taking care of and raising your kids, because it takes a village. It doesn't take just 2 people, which is a big mistake that we've made over the last, I think, because of that whole American dream ideal. It was great ideal, but I think it messed us up in many ways versus what I've learned in other cultures and through my travels on how the Eastern side of the world does things. Or at least in Spanish communities, a lot of Spanish communities, grow up with the grandparents in the home and things like that. I think it's very important to have those, even if you might, your values may be different. There's something about still having that, and having those different values are vital. And he talks about this. One thing he mentioned about relationship is that he rather has respect more than love. And that's something that I agree with. I think, I already talked to Karina about it. We're going to record a podcast about this, so look out for that. And one quote that I got at the end, and then the end, I stopped taking notes, but it says, when a man is not respected at home, he will look for it elsewhere. The whole advent of cheating, dishonesty, and all these things that's been happening. Our divorce rates are over 50%. I've had that happen in my family, where the man and this shows everywhere. He talked about this. It shows, like, you watch TV shows, sitcoms nowadays, the father is always the dummy, he's always the one making all the mistakes, and the woman, which great, like, women are getting their spotlight, like, they are amazing, they have done so many amazing things. And I see it now, like, in my work, like in my day-to-day, that women are kicking ass. They're getting more degrees than men, and they're killing it in the education space, and they're killing it in the work world. Like, they're getting promoted faster than men now at this moment. They're getting into more leadership positions. it's happening. The things that we talked about, like this wasn't happening back in the day, it's happening. So, we're in a good place for them, but we need both of us to be successful in order to live a fruitful and peaceful and good future. So the whole idea is when a man is not respected at home, he will look for it elsewhere. Us men really just look for that. We really look for respect. I mean, a lot of men get into fights because they are disrespected. If you ever seen two men argue in the street or at the end of a nightclub, and you figure out what was the reason, is because a man felt disrespected, and he will protect that because of his pride, right? There's a way to do that, and again, creating that dangerous side, like boundaries, being able to de-escalate using your words, and telling someone like, hey, I just didn't like the fact that you did that. I feel disrespected right now. And the other person having a right attitude and saying, I apologize for that. What can I do better in the future, right? It's just simple words that can help before an altercation goes to the fist and the feet, right? But it's true. If you're a woman with a man at home, respect your man. If you're a man, respect your lady, because in turn, you respecting her will in turn have her respect you, right? There's this give and take in a relationship. Duality always has to exist. And when that happens, we won't go crawling elsewhere to find someone who can obtain that. I see a lot of men, I always say, why is that guy in that relationship? Because I've seen, the woman disrespect him in many ways, and he just looks and feels deflated. And then you have a society that doesn't support that man in many ways because we're too focused on everything else, right? So it's why, it's why I think Andrew Tate became such a big proponent on social media, and his videos just blew up everywhere. His shorts, people that cut those small videos became so big, was because of this. But it was a great podcast. Obviously, a lot of things to agree with, things to disagree with. But it was good to learn about his history and his past and what he's been through to better understand why he's the way he is. And again, I still think my man has a bunch of trauma and he has some things to work through, but he's still young. I think he's in his mid-30s. He's still young, still has a lot to learn like we all do. And it's a matter of just like, if you don't like what he's said in the past, I highly recommend listening to one of his longer form podcasts. Find that context, and then you base your decision on there. Like me, hey, I don't like or hate the dude. I'm just like, okay, he has some great points, and then there's some points that I'm just like, I don't know about that dude. But as we all are, we're all just learning this thing called life. And we can only see it based on like our historic perspectives in the current state of the world. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Andrew Tate in general? If you're here towards the end, thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of the notes that I got from this 5-hour podcast. And yeah, that's all I got. All right. Until next week. 2 episodes a week now, so be on the lookout. And much love, y'all. I'll see y'all later. Peace.